Welcome to the Latin MedTech Leaders Podcast, a conversation with leaders who have succeeded or plan to succeed in Latin America. Please subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, etc. Today, our guest is Jim Ohneck. He is founder and chief executive officer of Epoch Lasers and holds a U.S. patent for his unique laser therapy device for treating chronic pain. So, Jim, it's a pleasure to have you here in the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome, Jim. All right. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I always have difficulties, but
Close enough. It's fine. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. All right. All right. All right, Jim. So I'm very intrigued with your experience in Latin America. Let's start with your journey to the region. How is it you got involved with the countries that I understand you started doing business in Latin America, Ecuador, Brazil?
Yes. And so my personal journey actually starts before that. In the days of my activity in the field of ophthalmology, I was involved with clinical trials that took place down in Latin America, down in Mexico. And that exposed me to how friendly people were and how open they were to trying new devices. It had always seemed a bit odd because their healthcare system you wouldn't think would do that, yet the doctors were very progressive there in thinking how they can get advanced tools to help people. And so that kind of planted the seed for years later for me to revisit Latin America. And so several years ago, I had an opportunity with my laser, an earlier version, to travel to Brazil, a little town called Uberlândia, a little farming community, and talk to local veterinarians and some local doctors about laser therapy and what it could do to help cure people, help cure animals, help treat people in pain. And it was a very fascinating trip for me. Again, I found just really wonderful people who were very, very interested to learn and very open-minded about new technology. So you fast forward from those two experiences to maybe about 3 years ago, and I was introduced to some people in Ecuador. And this is at a location called TOSA, and it stands for Temple of Self Ascension. And it seemed a little bit non-traditional for me as a medical professional. And I said, well, I'm going to start to talk to folks more. And I participated in a little bit of a radio show for a while and got to know the people that own it. And they said, hey, we're very interested in your laser. Can you bring it down here? And we have this beautiful place where we invite people, and we'd like you to come down and try it and see if it helps. And we have a little room where we can put the laser in and treat. And that's how I got started there. And of course, I brought the laser down, had a great visit, and it went extraordinarily well. And they found there was a good benefit from it. And it was from that visit where I really got the start, where I just happened to, over breakfast one morning, say, wouldn't it be great if we could take this high technology and use it to treat the indigenous people here in the country that have no access to healthcare? And that idea really resonated with everyone, and thus we went down the path of starting this clinic at Linda and getting donors for it. And I donated equipment and training and education, and now today it's spread. There's 5 clinics operating. So, and this is in a little over a year's period of time. So really incredible.
Yeah, it's really incredible. Wow. All right, so let's talk about what trends you see happening in Latin America today, what socioeconomic or disease trends you see happening in Ecuador, Brazil, or elsewhere in Latin
So, some very interesting trends that I see coming together. One is just on an economic trend and some focus on using Bitcoin and moving away from fiat currency to something like a Bitcoin currency within the country. And Ecuador is very highly focused on this to say maybe the dollar and the old exchange of money isn't necessary. And you're starting to see terminals go up where you can actually buy and sell Bitcoin at a small terminal. So that's a very fascinating macroeconomic trend. And one of the laser sales that I made there I actually was paid in Bitcoin through it.
Interesting.
So you have to be
Okay.
flexible, and I said okay, but in the process, that at the time Bitcoin was still going up, so there were fees and things associated with it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I did quite well with that method of payment. It was fast, efficient, and money comes in the Bitcoin. You go transfer it to your bank very quickly. So it was a very, very new trend. And again, these are things you wouldn't expect to happen. You would think these would be something you'd see in the Western European countries, not in Latin America. And so it's a very, very fascinating method of payment. And so that's one trend I see. Another more challenging trend is getting products in and out, and the high tariffs that get put on shipping product over. And so there's always ways to think about and be creative how you can get product down there and keep the flow if something needs to be repaired, to try to minimize the amount of headache that goes on when you're trying to sell the device. That's a medical electronic device there. So you have to really think about that, and how you're going to move equipment in and out of the country and do it effectively. How are you going to service the product? This type of thing. Uh,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, now that you talk about that, there are a few trends in the region where a lot of countries in Latin America have free
Yeah.
trade agreements with the United States and European
Yes, and
countries,
this is
etc.
helpful. The trade agreements you have to pay attention to, depending on the country you're going into, and how open are they. And the other thing I've learned is the geography isn't always like here in the States. So, I live in Ohio, as you know, and I can be Indiana, I can drive to Boston, to New York, and I can be there in a very short amount of time. It's not so easy to fly into Guayaquil and then take a 5-hour van ride overnight to get to your location the next morning. So you have to have a little bit of motivation, and the jet lag isn't
Yeah.
too bad, but the journey is long sometimes to get there. So you have to keep in mind that. But I see more and more flights being added on, and so I see this trend to give more
Yes.
access, and this is very encouraging for
Yes.
me.
Well, you're talking about two trends here, Jim. One trend is the build-up of infrastructure in Latin America. The region has traditionally been behind in infrastructure. And actually, Ecuador is one of the leading countries in Latin America in infrastructure now. And just for the listeners, education or information in case they're not familiar with Latin America, but specifically South America, the geographical barriers, the geographical challenges are immense. Because of the Andes, you have three mountain ranges, huge mountain ranges, huge geographic barriers between one place to the other. You have to go up and down the Andes to go from one place to the other. So it really, really is a challenge for companies to move products around. But yes, there's one of the trends is more infrastructure and more flight connectivity
It's
in Latin America, especially now with
Yeah,
low
it's
cost airlines.
interesting that on the computer side of things, their internet works extremely well, and I always have a little bit of a joke to say their internet works really well when the power's on, because
That's great. I mean, I love it.
and so
Yeah.
having been up in the
Yeah.
Andes, and up in this little area where there's Cuenca and Paute and these little tiny cities, the power goes off quite a bit, but the bandwidth,
Yeah.
the internet bandwidth, is great. I can have video conferences all over the world without a problem,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's
Interesting.
yeah,
Very
it's
good.
very interesting. So as long as you have power, yeah, when it works,
When it
it's
works.
great.
That's funny. Yeah, yeah, that's a challenge sometimes. And when I do most of my work remotely, I'm always traveling, especially in Colombia, all over Colombia. Sometimes energy, I mean, power goes off. I mean,
Yeah,
for many reasons, it's not 100% reliable, and I I can't think of an excuse to an U.S. client when I'm on a video call. I mean, what excuse should I give him? Because I cannot really tell him, no, just the power went off because I don't know, because sometimes it does. I mean, it takes about an hour to
But
go
this
back.
this happens
So
this
for
happens
a
in
US,
California too, right?
huh?
I mean, they have rolling power outages, so it's
Well,
um, no, we're not immune to it here in the States either. So
that's true, that's
not
true,
so
but not
often
so
though.
often. Not so often. Yeah, in Colombia, in Barranquilla, where I'm from, usually I stay there, and from Barranquilla, I travel to other parts of the country. So sometimes I spend a month in Barranquilla waiting for my next client to arrive or something. So we go to another city, but sometimes it rains and the power goes off. I mean, so it rains almost
Yeah.
3 times a week. So anyway, so let's focus on the conversation on better things. All right. So, Jim, let's talk about what you're doing today. I mean, what's the scope of your involvement in Latin America today? I understand you are involved in Mexico. I'm sorry, in Brazil, Ecuador, and you have plans to build another clinic in Mexico. Let's talk about the clinics involved.
Sure. Really, the idea of expanding just comes from how quickly we were able to deploy these clinics into Ecuador and realizing the need. When this idea was first conceived, we thought we'd be treating 10 people a week, maybe, and 10 of the indigenous population a week. And all of a sudden, within a few months, we were up to 50 a day. And that's when we designed the clinic, which went up very quickly. The structure for it, it wasn't like a U.S. Clinic. It doesn't have to be a sterile environment. It's not surgery. It's a therapy. But it made us realize that how great the need was. So I think we underestimated the need, and we underestimated how the populations would respond, and their graciousness of saying the recognition our indigenous population needs help. They don't have access to a CVS or a Walgreens. They can't go to the pharmacy and get drugs. They can barely go see a doctor. And there's so many laborers in the fields that are working there. Um, it's just incredible to watch, and they need help, and they're the nicest people you can imagine. And so what we kind of morphed our business model into was to say, how can we can't completely be charity. At the end of the day, we're a for-profit company. And as much as we love to help, so how can we weigh these two things, the social responsibility in helping against the need to make a profit and sell lasers and the things that we sell? And so one of the ideas and the approaches we've been taking, which seems to work pretty well, is to say, look, you can open this clinic, but really the requirement is we'd like you to do 30% of your work on the indigenous people that can't pay. And so we try to work with people that want to do that. And we've been successful in that model, taking the doctors that are working in the clinics and saying, yes, I recognize that and I do want to help. And I recognize I can do this many patients. And then on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, I can do the indigenous population, and then I can do both. And I can make it work ethically, and I can make it work for the population so that we're not just profit hungry, and that we really want to try to help both. And so it's a really good balance. And so we're currently looking at how to deploy, if you're ready for this number, as many as 1,800 clinics.
What?
So
1,800 clinics? Yes, in
no, not
Ecuador
just in
or
Ecuador, but yeah, in different
different
countries
countries?
around the world. But a lot of those would be in Latin America, including places like Ecuador, Guatemala, Brazil, Mexico. These are all places, and if you figure that in a little bit less than a year, we went from 0 to 5 clinics, really fast. Then it's very feasible to do this, and we have some people that are really behind this idea. If you start doing the math and you say, okay, if you can do as many as 40 to 50 patients a day, and you start taking that across even 1,000 clinics, you're talking about 10 million plus people, 10 to 20 million people that we
Yeah,
can help. And that is really what drives us. And so, from plans from a corporate standpoint, we have never lost sight of we're here to help people to try to do a couple things: get rid of the addiction to narcotic medications that are just handed out like candy to help, provide an alternative means of healing through this light type of device, and then to really deploy it in mass. If we can deploy it in mass at clinics that do both for profit and treat indigenous people, then we can treat a lot of people, um, and we can build and scale that up relatively quickly. And so I think this is really our plan, and it made us think about other areas of the world. If we can do that in South America as the blueprint for it, then why can't we do it in the U.S. with the Indian population here? Why can't we do it in some of the Eastern European countries where they need the help? Why can't we go into Ukraine right now? It's such a huge problem, and provide the technology. So this is really one of those things that you can call it social responsible marketing, but it's not political marketing. It's truly marketing to help people. And how can we help the most people overcome their conditions of pain? And one of the things we realize is if you have a person in pain, like yourself, and you have a chronic back pain, then you come home with that. At the end of the day, you're exhausted and you're maybe irritable with your family, because you're in pain. So if we can get one person better, then their family gets better because suddenly the person's in a better mood. And so this is what we see happening in Ecuador is the family units become happier and healthier because you're helping one person, and that actually goes to other folks. And so this is our idea. So we always say we're not just about de- deploying or selling a laser. We're about really helping people. That's kind of what's backing us up. It's the people first, and but we don't forget that we're a for-profit company either, so, and you have to keep that in mind. But I think the Latin American market has offered so much opportunity. And it's interesting if you look at the technology. They respond, the indigenous people in Ecuador as an example, respond so quickly to the treatments with the laser. And, being an engineer and scientist type of person, I look for the hardcore evidence and why are they getting treated better here? And I'm blessed to have two daughters that are doctors of microbiology. And I asked them, why do you think this is happening? Is it something, involved in the DNA? What's going on? And they gave me the most surprising answer, which is, I think, be speaking of positive things in Latin America, is that people don't know who John Hopkins is. They don't follow the FDA. They're open minded. It's not to say they're going to try things that are super crazy, but their minds are open. They don't have any roadblock that prevents them from accepting the full value of the treatment and the communication between the therapist and them being treated. And so this is, I go back to my beginning statement. You asked about my personal journey, that I've always found in Latin America how cordial and friendly and open people are, how the family matters. And what we find drives the volume in the clinics that are in Ecuador are family. One person comes in to be treated, and then they're successful. They realize their cousin, their aunt, their sister, their mother, their father, they all need to be treated. And suddenly its word of mouth spreads quite incredibly. And this is the beauty of that section of the world, I think, is that family value and their focus on nature, their belief system are all well open to certainly the wellness types of healing and technology.
and households are large. I mean, a small house has 20 people, and it has the brother, the mother, the father, the kids, the cousin, the grandparents, sometimes the great
It,
grandparents. So
it
it's
is, as
come to
a
mind.
having spent quite a bit of time in Ecuador and actually treating people there. I was always amazed because they would. I don't speak a lot of Spanish, by the way, which is another interesting topic. But I don't speak a lot of Spanish. But they would always say, I bring my mother. And then the next time they would bring their
Yeah,
mother, and then
yeah.
the next day they'd bring their sister.
Hmm.
And as you say, it's suddenly there's 11 people sitting in the,
Yeah,
the clinic waiting to be
yeah,
treated, and they're
yeah,
all related. And so this is quite
yeah,
fascinating. So another interesting point for your listeners is, okay, you don't speak Spanish. How do you do business in Ecuador?
yeah.
It's a
Hmm.
good
Exactly. Yeah.
point. And uh, I use Google Translate when I can. I'm, I'm providing therapy for patients, so I have to get their feedback. So I have a
Sure.
note sheet of phrases that I use to help with
Mm.
that. But it's funny, as much as I practice speaking it, they still don't understand me until I hold up the paper and they can read it. So you have to be,
Sure.
a
Yeah.
bit creative from a business standpoint, from a banking standpoint. There are usually multilingual people,
Hmm.
so it's not really hasn't been a struggle. It hasn't been a demand to say if you don't speak Spanish, you can't come into the country. And I've lectured there and I've given talks, and any medical professional usually speaks, one or more
Oh
languages.
yes.
They
Mhm.
certainly speak English as well, and they understand that the terms and things that are being used. So I really haven't found language as an impediment, even when it gets right to the patient level, to a Kanyare Indian in Ecuador who
Hmm.
speaks little or no English, or maybe knows two words. This Google Translate is extraordinarily helpful, and making some notes and letting them read the cards, the cheat cards, are very helpful.
Sometimes they even struggle speaking Spanish.
Yes,
By the way.
yes, they do, because the dialects are
Hmm.
different. Spanish in
Exactly.
Argentina,
Yeah.
Spanish in Ecuador is different than Spanish in Mexico.
Hmm.
And this I recognize. My One of my children, they double majored. One of their majors was in Spanish, and they always, yeah, even my daughter had trouble when she went to Argentina fully understanding saying, I
Exactly.
don't follow what they're saying. So, but at least they
Yeah,
have
yeah, 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 yeah. Even,
yeah, at
even,
least they have a family resource that can read and help. Yeah, yeah,
exactly. Yes, that's true. That's helpful. But even I'm a native speaker in Spanish, and sometimes it's difficult to go to a
yeah.
country like Argentina and understand what they're saying. They use different words, different intonation. The way they speak, I'm sorry, the way they write is different because they write as they speak. So it's the only country in Latin America where
Yes,
you find that.
yes.
So it's interesting. Yeah. Anyway, Jim, so any challenges, setting all these up in terms of regulatory challenges, obtaining market clearance for the products, for the lasers, license challenges to build the clinics? Let's talk about that. How you
So, from a
overcame those?
regulatory standpoint, this classifications of products are not ones that require, they're not class three implantable devices, they're therapeutic products. So, the ease of moving in and out is easier. And also, the people don't, the countries look at it and they try to follow the FDA trends. So, at least in the Latin America community. So, if the FDA recognizes something as not requiring a PMA, that they don't require it either. There's sometimes electrical safety standards and things that you have to pay attention to. But again, it's not a surgical product. It's a therapeutic product. You're not doing anything invasive to the patient. It's not used in a sterile environment. So as long as you have your documentation in order of what's necessary. What's the requirement in the U.S.? Well, you meet good manufacturing practices. You have ISO 13485 manufacturing facilities making the product. As long as you recognize those things, you show that there's a level of safety. So we really haven't encountered any regulatory challenges just yet that we've been able to overcome. Now, in Brazil, it's a little bit interesting because they want product built in Brazil. So if it's a medical product of any kind, they would prefer it's built down there. And this is similar in South Korea, so it's not an unusual circumstance. And so then you have to work through the agreements necessary to let them assemble the product there. Take the key modules, 5 modules, and plug them together and test and calibrate so that it's assembled there in the country. But you still maintain the quality level of the quality control. So there are ways to think through this.
Very good, Jim. I'm very glad to hear that you haven't really faced many challenges, regulatory challenges in Latin America so far. Mexico is also challenging. I mean, let's see. Oh, well, it's famous for being challenging. Let's see how it goes with Cafe Pris. Ecuador, I've never had any experience with Ecuador registering medical devices, but it seems like a straightforward country from what I read and from what I've spoken with people
Yes,
about
it appears to
the
be very
regulatory environment.
straightforward, and there's not a
Mhm.
lot of
Okay.
regulatory entanglement that you have to go through. So, yeah.
Okay. Very good. Excellent. All right, Jim. So we're
Yes.
close to the end of the show, and I'd like to ask you a final question about what will be your final words of wisdom if you had the CEO of a medical device company in front of you. What would you say to him or her if the company that he or she represents is interested in exploring Latin America as a
I would
place?
say that it's an incredibly worthwhile and lucrative market. That the access is very straightforward for many of the Latin American countries. That you'll be dealing with a population and people that are very friendly and very nice, and that you'll find them very open to new technology and new ideas and trying new things. And that it's a really good idea to try to pursue a business in Latin America. It's been um, a work of joy, not just work, and that makes it worthwhile. I think you'll have a very worthwhile experience if you go to Latin America and you work there and you try to bring your products there. You'll find very receptive people.
Excellent, Jim. Thank you so much for being in our show today. It's been a delightful conversation, and I look
Yes,
forward to
thank
being
you
in
very
touch.
much. Really appreciate the time today. Thank you.